The promise we forgot love, closure, and finding peace after a breakup. It all began on a rainy afternoon in late spring. The kind of rain that taps gently against the window, lulling you into a sense of peace. The sky was thick with clouds, casting a muted glow over the bustling city streets. Inside a small coffee shop tucked away on a quiet corner, Emma sat by the window, nursing her warm drink. She had always found solace in the simplicity of moments like this, when the world outside seemed to slow down just long enough for her to catch her breath. Emma wasn't the type to be easily swept away by the idea of love. She had grown up in a family that valued practicality over passion, where emotions were often kept in check and vulnerability was a luxury. Yet, here she was, staring at the steaming cup in front of her, thinking about him. Daniel. They had met almost a year ago, in a way that seemed almost too convenient to be true. It had been a chance encounter at a mutual friend's birthday party. She had never been one to believe in love at first sight, but when their eyes met across the crowded room, something inexplicable happened. There was a quiet pull, a magnetic force that seemed to draw them together. In the weeks that followed, they became inseparable. Conversations flowed effortlessly, and they found themselves lost in each other's company more often than not. Emma had never been one to believe in fate, but with Daniel, it felt like the universe had conspired to bring them together. They shared everything: laughs, dreams, fears, and even the smallest details of their daily lives. With him, Emma felt seen, understood, and, for the first time in a long while, truly alive. But it wasn't long before things began to shift. The early days of excitement began to fade, and the reality of their differences started to show. Daniel was impulsive, living in the moment, while Emma was more measured, always planning ahead. At first, she found his spontaneity refreshing, a welcome contrast to her own structured life. But over time, she began to feel a sense of unease. His unpredictability became a source of tension, and her desire for stability clashed with his free, spirited nature. They fought, as couples often do. Arguments that once seemed trivial grew into deeper disagreements. Emma found herself questioning everything. Was she being too rigid? Was she expecting too much? But even in the midst of their struggles, there was something undeniable between them. Something that neither of them could easily dismiss. It was on one of those stormy evenings, when the tension between them was palpable, that Daniel made a promise. "I know things have been difficult, but I'm not going anywhere," he had said, his voice steady, yet filled with an intensity that left Emma breathless. "I love you, Emma, and I promise we'll figure it out." But in that moment, Emma wanted to believe him. She wanted to hold on to that promise, to trust that love could conquer whatever challenges lay ahead. But as the days passed, that promise began to feel like a distant memory, something they both kept in the back of their minds but never fully addressed. Life went on. Emma buried herself in work, trying to keep her mind occupied. Daniel threw himself into his hobbies, retreating further into his world of music and art. They still saw each other, still shared those quiet moments of connection, but the distance between them had grown. The promise that had once seemed so certain now felt fragile, like something that could shatter at any moment. It wasn't until Emma received a message one evening, just a few days before their anniversary, that the reality of their situation hit her. It was from Daniel. Simple, yet loaded with meaning. "We need to talk." The message sent a wave of anxiety through her. She didn't want to read too much into it, but the uncertainty of his words gnawed at her. They had been through so much together. How had they reached this point? She thought back to their first kiss, the way his hands had gently cupped her face, the warmth of his lips against hers. It had felt like a beginning, a start of something beautiful. But now, everything felt uncertain. Emma sat on the edge of the couch, her fingers trembling as she typed a quick reply. "Are you okay?" She waited, staring at the screen, willing him to respond. Minutes passed, each one stretching into what felt like hours. Finally, her phone buzzed, and her heart skipped a beat. "I'm sorry, Emma. I've been thinking about us, and I don't know if I can keep this promise anymore." The words stung. She stared at the message, unsure how to process it. Daniel had been her world, her anchor, and now it felt like everything was slipping away. But as much as it hurt, Emma knew deep down that she couldn't keep pretending. She couldn't ignore the growing distance between them any longer. Love, she realized, wasn't always enough to keep two people together. There had to be more. A mutual understanding, a willingness to grow together, to change and adapt as life shifted around them. Emma had always prided herself on being self-sufficient, on not needing anyone to complete her. But in that moment, she understood that love wasn't about being whole on your own. It was about finding someone who complemented you, someone you could share your hopes, fears, and dreams with. And as much as she loved Daniel, she couldn't ignore the fact that they were no longer the people they had once been. Tears welled up in her eyes as she typed her final response. "I think it's time we let go, Daniel." She hit send and set the phone down, the weight of the words sinking in. It wasn't the ending she had wanted, but it was the one they needed. And as the rain continued to fall outside, Emma realized that sometimes the hardest part of a relationship wasn't falling in love, but knowing when to let go. The days after Emma sent her final message to Daniel were a blur. The air in her apartment felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Each morning was marked by the same routine. Wake up, get dressed, go to work, and try to keep her mind from wandering. But even in the most mundane of tasks, memories of Daniel lingered like echoes she couldn't shake. His laughter, his voice, the way he always knew how to make her feel like she was the most important person in the room. She had tried to move on. It had been a week since that fateful message, and in that time, Emma had kept herself busy. She threw herself into her work, immersing herself in projects and meetings, focusing on anything that could fill the void that Daniel had left. But no matter how hard she tried, the emptiness persisted. It was on a Thursday afternoon, as she was reviewing a presentation for an upcoming client meeting, that Emma's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The name on the screen sent a jolt of panic through her chest. Daniel. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. Maybe he had changed his mind. Maybe he wanted to try again. But the truth was, Emma didn't know if she was ready for that. Not yet. With a deep breath, she swiped the screen to answer. "Hello?" There was a long pause on the other end before Daniel's voice came through, hesitant and raw. "Emmett, it's me. I know it's been a while, but I really need to talk." Her heart pounded in her chest, the familiar H resurfacing. She had spent days convincing herself that she was fine, that she could live without him. But hearing his voice again brought everything rushing back. She closed her eyes, fighting to steady her breath. "What do you need to talk about, Daniel?" "I don't know where to start," he said, his words stumbling over each other. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About us. And I can't stop thinking about you." Emma sat back in her chair, her mind racing. He was still thinking about her, still holding on to whatever had been between them. But what did that mean for her? She had already made her decision. She had already let go, or so she thought. "Daniel, we can't keep doing this," Emma said, her voice quieter than she intended. "I thought we were past this." "I know," he replied quickly, his tone pleading. "I know you've moved on, and I don't expect things to go back to how they were. But I can't shake the feeling that there's something unfinished between us. Something we never really dealt with. I miss you, Emma." The words hung in the air, and Emma felt the weight of them settle on her chest. How could she have forgotten how much he meant to her? How could she have convinced herself that their relationship was nothing more than a fleeting moment, a chapter in her life that had ended too soon? But then she remembered the promise that had been broken, the words he had spoken, so sure and full of conviction, and yet, when things had gotten tough, he had retreated. She couldn't forget that. She couldn't pretend that everything was fine just because Daniel missed her. He had hurt her, and the wounds, though not as fresh, were still there, hidden just beneath the surface. "Daniel, I can't do this right now," Emma said, her voice firm, though her heart ached with the words. "I need space. We both do." There was a long silence on the other end, and Emma felt a pang of guilt. She didn't want to hurt him. She never did. But the truth was, she couldn't keep holding on to a relationship that had already fallen apart. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her eyes filling with unshed tears. "I get it," he said quietly, his voice laced with sadness. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, too. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to make you feel like you were alone in this." "I know you didn't," Emma replied, her voice softer now, but resolute. "But sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes, we need more than promises." The line went quiet for a moment before Daniel spoke again. "I understand, Emma, and I'll respect your space. I just needed to say it. To tell you that I haven't forgotten, and I never will." With that, the conversation ended, and Emma was left staring at the blank screen of her phone. She sat there for what felt like an eternity, the silence of her apartment pressing in around her. It was over. For real this time. But as the days passed, Emma couldn't help but feel the weight of what had been left unsaid. Daniel's words lingered in her mind, haunting her in a way she hadn't expected. He missed her. He still cared. And despite everything, she couldn't deny that she still cared too. She thought about their shared memories. Their first trip to the beach, their late night walks through the city, the way they used to talk for hours about their hopes and dreams. It felt like a lifetime ago, and yet it still felt so close. She had let go, but her heart had yet to catch up. But that was the thing about relationships. They didn't end neatly. They didn't come with clear-cut resolutions. Sometimes the endings were messy, complicated, and painful. And sometimes you had to let go before you could fully understand why it was necessary. Emma spent the next few weeks in a state of quiet reflection. She focused on herself, trying to regain the sense of independence she had lost during their time together. She spent more time with friends, rediscovered old hobbies, and started to embrace the life she had put on hold for so long. Yet, even as she moved forward, there was a part of her that held on to the past, to the promise of what could have been. It wasn't until one rainy evening, weeks later, when Emma was walking home from the grocery store, that she saw him again. Daniel was standing under the awning of a cafe, looking as though he was waiting for someone, or perhaps for something. He looked up as she passed by, and for a moment, their eyes locked. Neither of them said a word, but in that brief moment, it was as if time had stood still. The world around them blurred, and all that mattered was the quiet space between them. She stopped, and he stepped forward. "I didn't want to leave things like that," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I know I can't change the past, but maybe we can start over. Not as a couple, but as something else. Something new." Emma looked at him, her heart racing. She had let go, but now, standing in front of him again, she felt a pull, a familiar ache in her chest. She didn't know what the future held, but maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop looking back and start moving forward. Together, but not as they had been. The promise, it seemed, wasn't quite forgotten after all. The days following Emma's unexpected encounter with Daniel felt like a slow unraveling of everything she had carefully rebuilt. She found herself replaying that brief moment in her mind, the hesitation in his voice, the unspoken words that hung in the air between them. They had stood there, a mere few feet apart, yet it felt as though there were miles between them. The distance between them wasn't just physical. It was emotional, woven together by years of shared history, unspoken regrets, and fractured promises. Since that meeting, Emma couldn't shake the feeling of unfinished business. She had been determined to move on, to close that chapter of her life. But Daniel's words echoed in her mind, "Maybe we can start over." Not as a couple, but as something else, something new. The possibility was tempting. She had always prided herself on her ability to control her emotions, to be logical and calculated. But this was different. Emma didn't know what it was about Daniel that made her feel like she had to think about him, even when it made no sense. They had broken up for a reason, after all. There had been too much distance, too many disagreements, too many moments of silence that had spoken louder than any words. And yet, standing in front of him again, she had felt something stir deep inside her. A longing, a hope that perhaps there was still a way to make things work. But she couldn't let herself go down that road again. She had learned her lesson. The last time she had let herself believe in the promise of a relationship, it had ended in disappointment. The scars were still fresh, even if they were hidden beneath the surface. They had loved each other once, but that wasn't enough anymore. The dynamic had shifted, and the person standing in front of her wasn't the same Daniel she had fallen in love with. Nor was she the same Emma. Despite her inner conflict, Emma agreed to meet Daniel again, though under the condition that they could talk without the pressure of trying to force something that wasn't meant to be. They had settled on meeting at a cafe, the same place where they had shared so many quiet moments together. As she walked to the cafe, Emma couldn't help but notice how everything had changed. The city felt different now, as if it, too, was moving forward while she remained in the same place, stuck between the past and the future. The streets were busier than she remembered, and the familiar hum of the city was somehow less comforting. She couldn't tell if it was her mind playing tricks on her or if the world had simply shifted. When she arrived at the cafe, Daniel was already seated at a corner table, his back to the window. He looked up as she approached, his face breaking into a tentative smile. "Hey," he said softly. "I'm glad you came." Emma smiled faintly, sitting down across from him. There was a moment of awkward silence, and she realized how much time had passed since they had last spoken like this. "How have you been?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've been okay," Daniel replied. "Trying to figure things out, you know. I've been thinking a lot about us. About everything." Emma nodded, her fingers wrapped around her cup of tea. She didn't know where to start, but she knew this conversation had to happen. They couldn't keep pretending that nothing had changed. "I've been thinking a lot too," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But not in the way you might think. I think we both need to face the truth about where we are right now." Daniel's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, Emma saw the man she once knew, the one who had cared for her, the one who had made promises that she couldn't forget. But there was also a new look in his eyes, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. "I don't want to make things harder for you, Emma," Daniel said, his voice tinged with regret. "I know I've messed up. I know I've let you down. But I want to fix it. I don't want to lose you." Emma took a deep breath. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, but she also knew the weight of those words. She had heard them before. She had believed them before. And in the end, they hadn't been enough. "You didn't just let me down, Daniel," she replied quietly. "We both let each other down. We stopped trying. We stopped communicating. And when things got hard, we let go of each other." There was a long silence as the truth settled between them, heavy and undeniable. Daniel opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Emma couldn't look at him just then. Instead, she stared at the steam rising from her tea, focusing on the small, mundane things to keep herself grounded. "I know," Daniel finally whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't have an excuse. But I've never stopped caring about you. And I hate that we're here, that we're not together anymore." Emma took a deep breath. She had to be strong. She couldn't let herself get swept up in the tide of emotions that threatened to rise. "Daniel, I care about you too. I always will. But I can't go back to what we had. I can't keep living in the past. We're not the same people anymore, and I don't know if we can ever be again." The words hit him like a punch to the gut, and Emma immediately regretted how harsh they sounded. But she had to be honest. She couldn't afford to lie to herself or to him. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Emma could feel the weight of the moment, the finality in the air. After a long pause, Daniel finally spoke, his voice steady but tinged with sadness. "So, what does that mean for us? Are we just done?" Emma hesitated. The answer was complicated, far more complicated than either of them could have expected. "I think we need time apart. Real time apart. No contact, no looking back. I need to figure out who I am without you, Daniel. And I think you need to do the same." Daniel nodded slowly, as if the words were sinking in. "I get it," he said quietly. "I don't want to drag this out, Emma. I don't want to hold you back. If this is what you need, then I'll respect it. I'll let you go." For a moment, Emma just sat there, the weight of the decision settling over her like a blanket. It felt like a death, a final goodbye to something that had once been beautiful. And yet, in the midst of the pain, there was also a sense of relief. She had made her decision, she had faced the truth, and now she could move forward. "Thank you," Emma whispered, the words barely audible as they left her lips. They sat in silence for a while longer, neither of them speaking, both lost in their own thoughts. The rain had stopped outside, and the world seemed quieter somehow, as if it, too, was waiting for them to make their next move. When Emma finally stood to leave, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't the end she had imagined, but it was the end they both needed. And as she walked away from the cafe, she felt a glimmer of hope stirring inside her. A hope that one day, they might find peace, even if it wasn't together. The promise they had made was long forgotten, but in its place was something more valuable, the freedom to heal. Time, as it always does, moved forward. Days blurred into weeks and weeks into months. Emma threw herself into her work, her friends, and a new routine that didn't include Daniel. It wasn't easy, not by any means. There were nights when she'd lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment they had shared, wondering if she had made the right choice. But deep down, she knew it was the only choice she could have made. They had needed to let go of each other, for their own growth, their own healing. She filled the void left by him with things that once seemed so trivial but were now life-saving distractions. A book she had meant to read for months, a trip to the farmer's market with friends, and evenings spent learning how to bake bread. These small acts, these seemingly insignificant moments, began to stitch the fabric of her life back together. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough for now. And yet, despite all of her attempts to move on, something was missing. Something that no distraction could fill. It was that quiet yearning for companionship, that longing to share her thoughts with someone who truly understood her. But she had made a promise to herself. No more falling back into old patterns. No more rushing into relationships that weren't meant to be. But life, as it often does, has a way of throwing the unexpected in your path. It happened on a Friday evening, about 3 months after her last conversation with Daniel. Emma had been invited to a small gathering at a friend's apartment, a casual get-together to unwind after a long work week. She hadn't really been in the mood for socializing, but she knew it would do her good to get out of the house. The moment she stepped into the apartment, the familiar buzz of conversation, laughter, and music filled the air. There was an ease to the gathering, a warmth that made Emma feel instantly at home. She greeted a few people, grabbed a glass of wine, and found a spot by the window, where the city lights twinkled like a million stars. As she sipped her wine, lost in thought, she heard a voice behind her. Emma, as she turned, expecting to see one of her friends, but instead, her gaze locked with someone she hadn't seen in months. It was Daniel. He looked different somehow, yet still the same. His hair was a little longer, and he had a few more lines on his face. But the familiar spark in his eyes was still there, that same look of intensity, of someone who felt things deeply. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice caught somewhere between surprise and confusion. "What are you doing here?" He smiled, a sheepish grin that tugged at her heart. I didn't know you'd be here. I guess we have some mutual friends." Emma nodded, not entirely sure what to say. The last time she'd seen him, they had parted on terms of finality. She had made it clear that they needed to move on, and yet here he was, standing in front of her again, as if nothing had changed. "I didn't mean to make this awkward," Daniel continued, his voice softening. I wasn't sure where to go after everything. I've been thinking about you a lot. About us. And I didn't want to let that go without at least saying hello." The honesty in his words struck Emma like a wave, knocking her off balance. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to show up here, in her life unannounced and full of the same unresolved emotions that had haunted them both. She glanced away for a moment, taking a deep breath. "I thought we agreed that we needed space," Emma said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know if I'm ready for whatever this is." "I know," he said, his tone apologetic. "I didn't want to upset you. I guess I'm not as good at letting go as I thought I was." For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. The noise of the party seemed to fade into the background, and Emma's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Daniel had made the decision to stay away, to respect her space, and yet here he was, admitting that he hadn't moved on. She didn't know how to feel about that. Part of her wanted to run, to escape the weight of their past, but another part of her, the part that still cared for him, wanted to stay and hear him out. "Why now?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "Why did you decide to show up now, after all this time?" Daniel hesitated, his eyes flickering with something unspoken. I think I just realized that I didn't give us the closure we needed. We never really got to say goodbye, not in the way we needed to. And I don't want to leave things unfinished." And Emma felt a pang in her chest. Closure. That was exactly what she needed. But she had never expected to find it this way, standing in the middle of a crowded apartment, surrounded by laughter and light, with Daniel back in her life like a ghost from the past. "You were always good at saying what needed to be said," Emma said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I don't know if we can just pick up where we left off. I've moved on, Daniel. I've had to. And I don't know if I can go back." "I'm not asking you to go back," he said quickly, taking a step closer. "I just want to be part of your life again, in whatever way that means. I don't expect us to fall back into what we had. I just want the chance to prove that I'm not the same person I was when we ended things." Emma's heart was a battlefield, torn between the familiarity of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Could she let herself believe in him again? Could she trust him enough to let him back into her life, even if it wasn't as a partner but as something else? "I need time to think," she whispered, her words more to herself than to him. "I need to figure out what I really want, without all the emotions clouding my judgment." Daniel nodded, his expression one of understanding. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." And with that, the moment passed. Daniel stepped back, giving her the space she had asked for. They stood there in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts, surrounded by the noise of the party but worlds apart. Emma didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first met Daniel. She had changed, grown, and learned what it meant to be alone, to be independent, to be her own person. And while she would always have a place for him in her heart, she wasn't sure if she could ever return to the person she had been when they were together. As the night wore on, Emma made her way to the door, her mind still reeling from the unexpected encounter. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was finally in control of her own life. Whatever happened with Daniel, she was ready to face it. On her own terms. The promise they had made long ago was no longer a tether holding her back. It was a lesson learned, a chapter closed. And now, Emma was ready to write the next one. One that was all her own. It had been weeks since that night, the night when Emma had seen Daniel again. The encounter, though brief, had left her feeling unsettled, as if she had walked away from something important without fully understanding what it was. Yet, despite the lingering questions in her mind, she had tried to carry on with her life. The days had continued to stretch forward, filled with work, friends, and moments of quiet solitude. She had found a rhythm in her life without him, one that felt stable, if not entirely fulfilling. Her routine had become her sanctuary. Every morning, she would wake up early, go for a run, and then get ready for the day. At work, she immersed herself in projects that demanded her attention. She spent evenings with friends, laughing and connecting, keeping the emptiness of her heart at bay. There were days when it felt like she had truly moved on, like she had let go of the past. But then there were moments, the quiet ones, when she was alone, that reminded her how much she had left behind. As the weeks passed, Emma found herself in a strange limbo. She wasn't unhappy, but she wasn't truly content either. There was a part of her that still missed the person she had been with Daniel, the person she had been when they had shared everything. The intimacy, the conversations, the feeling of being seen. That had been real, hadn't it? She wasn't sure anymore. She had been so focused on moving forward, on reclaiming her independence, that she hadn't stopped to think about what she was really running from. It was late one Thursday evening when Emma's phone buzzed with an incoming message. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the name on the screen, Daniel. He hadn't reached out since their last meeting, and she had respected his silence. But now, here he was again, breaking the stillness that had settled over her life. "Can we talk?" The message was simple, but the weight of it hit her all the same. For a moment, she hesitated. What could he possibly want now? Was he still carrying that same hope of a second chance? Or had he finally come to terms with the fact that their time together was over? She thought about ignoring it, about letting the silence between them stretch a little longer, but something inside her pushed her to reply. "Sure." "When?" "Tomorrow evening. I'll be at the cafe." She stared at her phone for a moment longer, the words swimming in front of her eyes. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this, if she was prepared to face him again. But there was something about his message, something about the simplicity of it, that made her want to go. To finally face the truth about everything that had happened between them. The next evening, Emma walked into the cafe, the familiar scent of coffee and baked goods enveloping her. She spotted Daniel right away. He was sitting at a table by the window, his eyes on the door, waiting for her. He looked different now, more settled, more at peace with himself. But there was still that same intensity in his gaze, that same vulnerability that had drawn her to him in the first place. "Oh," she said, her voice tentative as she approached the table. "I got your message." Daniel smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I wasn't sure if you would." Emma shrugged, taking a seat across from him. "I wasn't sure if I should," she admitted. "But here we are." "Oh." The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was as though they both knew why they were here, why they had agreed to meet again. The tension from their last conversation still lingered, but it wasn't the same kind of tension. It was more like an unspoken understanding that neither of them had fully processed what had happened, that neither of them had truly let go. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Daniel said after a long pause. "About everything, about us. And I realized something. I don't regret anything we had, not a single moment." Emma looked at him, her heart stirring with a mixture of emotions. "I don't regret it either," she replied quietly. "But regret isn't enough to make something work." "I know," Daniel said, his voice heavy. "I think I finally understand that. I thought I could just fix everything, that if I tried hard enough, we could go back to how things were. But I've realized that's not what we need. We don't need to go back, Emma. We need to move forward. Just not together." The words hit her harder than she expected. She had always known deep down that they couldn't go back, that the past was something they couldn't recapture. But hearing him say it, hearing him acknowledge that they had both changed, made it feel real. Final. I don't want you to think I'm asking for anything more. Daniel continued, his voice steady now. I'm not. I'm not asking for us to pick up where we left off or to try again. I just needed to say that I've learned from this, from us, and I hope that, one day, we can both look back on this and know that we were better for it. And Emma felt a lump form in her throat as she listened to him. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, nor was he pleading for a second chance. He was simply acknowledging the truth that had been so difficult for both of them to accept. They were no longer the same people, and they could no longer be the people they had been together. I've been learning too, Emma said, her voice trembling slightly. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can be independent, that I can build a life on my own. But I've also learned that some things are worth holding on to. Some memories, some moments, they don't just fade away. They stay with you, and I think that's okay. Daniel nodded, his eyes softening. I think so too. They sat there in silence for a while, the weight of their words settling between them. Neither of them had expected this. Neither of them had expected to come to a conclusion that felt so final, so complete. But here they were, both of them standing at the edge of something new, something unknown. I guess this is goodbye, Emma said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Not goodbye, Daniel replied, his voice warm. Just see you later. But Emma smiled, a small but genuine smile, as she stood up to leave. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in months, she felt a sense of peace. The promise they had made to each other was long gone, but in its place was something more important: understanding. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. As she walked out of the cafe and into the cool evening air, Emma realized that she had finally let go. She had found closure, not in the way she had expected, but in a way that was far more meaningful. And as the city lights flickered around her, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Alone, yes, but stronger for having walked this path. The past was behind her now, and the future was waiting. Months had passed since Emma and Daniel's final conversation in that quiet cafe, and life had continued to unfold in its usual, unpredictable way. Time had a curious way of healing wounds, of smoothing the sharp edges of pain until it was merely a distant memory. But even as the months passed, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. She had moved forward in so many ways, building a life that was uniquely hers, learning to enjoy the independence she had once feared, rediscovering parts of herself she had put aside for the sake of love. Yet, there was still an ache that lingered in her chest, a void that no new routine or distraction could fill. She had come to terms with the fact that she would always carry a piece of Daniel with her, as one carries a piece of their past, both the beautiful and the painful. The promise they had made, the one they both broke, had faded into something that no longer haunted her. But the memories of what they had shared, the laughter, the love, the connection, remained not as something to regret, but as something that had shaped her. That was the part of their relationship she was learning to cherish. One rainy afternoon, while Emma was working from home, she received an unexpected call. The ringtone was familiar, and for a brief moment, her heart skipped a beat. It was a number she hadn't seen in months. She hesitated before answering, unsure of what to expect. She had moved on. She reminded herself. She had no reason to feel nervous. Hello, Emma? It was Daniel. His voice sounded the same, yet there was a note of caution in it that hadn't been there the last time they spoke. A soft, unfamiliar vulnerability in the way he said her name. Yeah, it's me, Emma replied, her voice steady but guarded. What's going on? There was a pause on the other end, as if he was weighing his words. I didn't mean to call out of the blue, but I just wanted to see how you were doing. Emma leaned back in her chair, staring out the window at the gray sky, the rain falling in gentle sheets. She had known this moment might come, though she hadn't expected it to feel so strange. It wasn't anger or sadness that she felt in that moment. It was something else, something quieter, the echo of something unfinished. "I'm doing well," Emma said carefully, keeping her tone neutral. "Things are different, but they're good." Daniel let out a small sigh of relief on the other end. "I'm glad to hear that. I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation, and I've come to realize that I never really gave you the closure you needed. I don't want to linger in the past, but I also don't want to leave things unsaid." Emma closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. It was the closure she had been waiting for, though she hadn't expected it to come in this form. She had long since stopped needing answers from him, but hearing him acknowledge their past, acknowledge her, felt like a gentle release. She hadn't known she needed that until now. "I think we both had our reasons for letting go," Emma said softly. "And I think it was the right decision. I've learned a lot since then. About myself, about love, about what it really means to let go. Men too." Daniel responded quietly. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about our time together, and I know I wasn't perfect. I know I made mistakes, but I also know that I was never happier than when we were together, Emma. I can't forget that, and I don't want to forget it." But Emma smiled sadly, feeling the weight of his words. She had spent so much time trying to bury the past, trying to move forward without ever fully acknowledging the depth of what they had shared. Now, listening to him, she realized that it was okay to remember. It was okay to miss what they had, as long as she didn't get lost in it. "You don't have to forget it," she said softly. "But we can't go back. We both know that. We've both changed, and we have to keep moving forward. The past has its place, but it's not where we belong anymore." There was a long pause, and Emma wondered if he was processing her words. When he finally spoke again, his voice was full of quiet understanding. "You're right. I guess I just wanted you to know that I've never regretted what we had. And I don't regret letting you go either." But Emma felt a sense of finality settle in her chest, a weight lifting that she hadn't realized was still there. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. That means more than you know." The silence stretched between them for a moment, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. It was the kind of silence that came after understanding had been reached, after words had been said that needed to be said. "I should let you go," Daniel said gently. "I just wanted to check in. I hope you're happy, Emma. I really do." "I am," Emma replied, her voice steady now. "I really am." After a final, heartfelt goodbye, Emma hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, the world outside her window still spinning, the rain still falling. It was over in a way that she hadn't expected. Not with bitterness, not with anger, but with acceptance, with peace. The phone call had brought her the closure she hadn't even known she needed. The lingering doubt, the unfinished business, had been swept away. Daniel had let her go, and she had let him go too. And with that, she was free to move forward without looking back. In the weeks that followed, Emma began to settle into a new chapter of her life. She had never expected it to be easy, and it wasn't. There were still moments of doubt, moments when she missed the intimacy of being in a relationship, when she longed for the kind of connection she had shared with Daniel. But there were also moments of joy. Quiet moments, like when she found herself laughing with friends, or when she spent a Saturday morning exploring a new cafe in the city. These small moments were hers, and they were enough. She threw herself into her work even more, taking on new projects and pushing herself in ways she hadn't thought possible. Her career, once something that had felt secondary to her personal life, now became her focus. It was a place where she could create, where she could define her own path. And with each success, with each new challenge, Emma felt herself growing stronger. Her friends, too, had become an even more important part of her life. They had been there for her through everything, offering support, laughter, and the occasional shoulder to cry on. They were her family now, the people she could count on when everything else seemed uncertain. But the most important thing Emma realized was that she was enough. She didn't need anyone else to complete her. She was already whole. She had been whole all along, and the love she had once shared with Daniel, as beautiful as it had been, was just one chapter of a much larger story. Her story. And as Emma stood at the edge of her apartment balcony one quiet evening, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, she realized that she was no longer afraid of the future. The promise they had made, the one they had forgotten, no longer defined her. What defined her now was the person she had become, and the person she was still becoming. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about embracing it, learning from it, and moving forward, knowing that the best was yet to come. The promise they had made was forgotten, but the lessons it had taught her about love, loss, and the strength to keep going would stay with her forever. And with that, Emma took a deep breath, letting go of the last remnants of the past, and stepped into the future. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.